Some shots in the preliminary task were filmed handheld, which made it slightly shaky in terms of filming, and so the shot wasn't as steady as possible in the preliminary task. However, we improved our shooting in our actual film, and unlike the preliminary task, we made full use of the spirit level in order to make the shots as straight as possible. These made the qualities of our shots in our final film have more of a professional feel. The quality of framing shots in our final film were much more improved compared to those in the preliminary task. For example, in our preliminary task, the shots were all stationary. We did not use panning or tracking, which we used later in the final piece. In our preliminary task, we did, however, practice the same shots that we used in the preliminary task in our final film. For example, over the shoulder and point of view shots were used both in the preliminary task and our final film. We improved our quality and quantity of different shots in elimination. For example, more shots were used compared to the preliminary task, such as long shot, close-ups and tracking. The preliminary task was supposed to be an interview. However, we did not pay attention to location or the realistic nature of an interview, and this made it slightly unbelievable. It was slightly shabby in terms of place and acting, as we did not use much time planning. However, in our final film, it had much more of a realistic feel to it because we knew exactly what we were doing in order of a horror film, and we planned where we were to shoot exactly the right location, and everything was much more realistic as a horror film. We realised that we had to change the camera angle when Lisa was walking through the park because the long shot included cars in the background, which from a realistic viewpoint wouldn't be there as it's a horror film and she's in a remote place on her own and she's alone when she gets killed. However, some of the long shots did still include some cars in the backgrounds, but we couldn't really do anything about it unless we changed the complete location, and we wanted to do it in the park that we set. So that was a fault. But in our preliminary task, we hadn't thought of the lighting, setting or colour, but for our final film, we made careful consideration over all the mise-en-scenes. For example, in Scream, the girl has blonde hair and is wearing all white. Our character Lisa, although she had dark hair, we made a point of having her in a white shirt. And we had the killer wearing black, which is conventional because most killers, you can't see their face and they're wearing just black. And we also covered our killer's face by a mask, which is also seen in Halloween and the beginning of Scream. We do not actually see the killer. In our preliminary task, we did not discuss or plan most aspects of mise-en-scene, which shows because it looks quite makeshift and it doesn't have a professional feel. We used the basic techniques of editing for the preliminary task, such as cutting and fade in, fade out. However, we used more forms of editing such as sound, music, and we also distorted the camera. The camera set in the shot of the photography room at the end, where the killer is holding up the photos of his killers. We edited it so that the camera looks twisted and distorted. We also used techniques to make the film more smooth, for example, fade in, fade out for the transitions, and we used a film grain technique at the beginning so that it looks old-fashioned and it made it more obvious that that scene was set in the past via the use of the film grain. And it was also set in a sepia style, which does look old-fashioned, and it made it more obvious that it's set in the past. We incorporated sound with music to enhance the scary aspect of the film. When I was looking at music, I joined two musics together via GarageBand, and one of them was just an eerie kind of sound. The other one was an actual tune, like a creepy tune, and together this made it more scary and more tense for the audience. All music was set in minor key, and sound effects such as a heartbeat and breathing increased the suspension in the audience. We used a heartbeat when the killer is looking at the girl through the bush. Whereas in our preliminary task, we did not use any non-diegetic sounds. Our position of actors in elimination was important because, for example, in the beginning, Harry pushes the boy to the ground and the camera films up, and this shows levels as Harry is a bully, and as he has just pushed the killer to the ground, well, the killer that's to be, to the ground, and he's facing up looking at him at a point of view shot, so the bully being higher up indicates more power and more strength compared to the killer. The quality of group planning, target meetings and organisation. To be honest, in our preliminary task, although we all have the same free periods, which is lucky, we didn't spend any of our free time doing preliminary tasks. We spent our lessons mostly doing it, and it shows because it's not as good as our final film, because in our final film we met up after school, we waited until it was dark, we also went outside our own time to do this. And when Jordan was the organiser, and he was very good at organising, and generally we kept to the timetable unless there was a problem with it or one of us had to do something else, but that was very rare. Most of the time we did meet up when he set a date, which was useful and good for our film. However, in our preliminary task, we didn't have an organiser, we didn't have dates set, we just did it then and there. Our group dynamics in our preliminary task was quite one-sided. A lot of us only had one task to do, as we didn't include costume or location. We didn't have any of those things in our preliminary task. However, the dynamics, like our group tasks in our final film, were much more even. I had music, and I was an actor. I helped with the script, although we all helped with the script, and we all helped with editing because that is the hardest task. And together we did work really well in our final film compared to the preliminary task where it was slightly shabby and slightly disorganised.